Hey guys and gals, and welcome back to the IroncladLion channel. It's finally time for the legendary Modao Battalion guide, to finish the Season 8 unit guide series. An anti-cavalry specialist unit with thick armor, the Modaos are a powerful and effective unit on the battlefield. In this Modao guide, we'll take a look at the Modao seasonal challenges, attributes and traits, Veterancy Lines, and Doctrines. After that, we'll hit the training yard to demonstrate unit abilities and mechanics. Then, the juicy battlefield examples that everyone loves. And finally, we'll wrap it up with a few of the unit weaknesses and my final thoughts on the unit. As always, the video will be split into segments if you'd like to skip to any specific section. These in-depth guides take a lot of time and effort, so consider subscribing if you enjoy them. Now let's get to it. A 5-star legendary unit. The Modao actually come with a bit of development history to them. Originally designed to be the second epic tier unit alongside the Grey Hairs for Season 8, the Modao Battalion was actually promoted to legendary status shortly before Season 8 began. The legendary musket unit to appear in the Imperial Arquebusier line was supposed to be the legendary unit for this season. Classified as Grenadiers, these units have been delayed till Season 9 Tyranny, as they have new unit mechanics that were not ready for a Season 8 release. So instead, the Modaos were to receive significantly boosted stats to compete at the legendary tier. I bring this up because it ties into the Modao Battalion seasonal challenges, which we will look at now. First page of the Modao seasonal challenges unlocks the 3-day trial contract. Second page unlocks 120 unit medals. Third page unlocks the Modao Battalion permanently. This is significantly faster than unlocking any other season's legendary unit, as there are fewer challenges and fewer pages. Originally designed as an epic tier unit, the devs decided to keep their difficulty reduced as a sort of apology for the last minute change. The fourth page unlocks the Modao Doctrine 2, and the final page unlocks the Modao Battalion avatar. Let's take a look at some numbers and dive into the Modao attributes and traits. The Modao Battalion is a pretty chunky unit, with heavy armor and very respectable damage for a melee unit. Their first formation is 3 ranks, although this version of 3 ranks is quite spread out compared to the Grey Hair 3-rank formation. If you are feeling geometric, the second formation is the Trapezoid formation, which functions like a chunky wedge formation. Up to unit traits, we've got Wall of Blades. Wall of Blades allows the Modaos to stop enemy cavalry for 1 second and then apply a 60% slow to them. They will cripple any cavalry unit in the game, and is the primary trait that makes Modao an awesome counter to cavalry. The second trait is Immovable. The best way I can summarize this ability is the Modao Battalion is thick and can't be sent flying. They can be knocked around, but are more resilient to control abilities than most units. While under the immovable effect, which takes place during their brace, they take 50% less damage from sword and lancer cavalry. Any damage they do take from those units is turned into bleed damage instead of raw. The third trait is fire resistant, making them less vulnerable to thermal weapons. Final trait of the Modao are part of the King Dynasty and have their leadership reduced by 15 during Season 8. On to the unit abilities. Ability number 1 is Modao Defense, which is the equivalent of a brace. The brace takes a second to get into, but then provides a universal 20% damage resist for the Modao from all sources. The second ability is Modao March, which is a rather odd ability that has a few parts to it. It will push enemies back, stab them, or give the Modao a speed boost, depending on the distance to their target. The third and final ability is Carnage, which is a combination of a charge ability and a huge burst of damage. These abilities all have some quirks to them, and we'll go over them more in the training yard. But for now, let's take a look at the Modao Veterancy Lines. The Modao Veterancy Lines are both very well designed, and it's certainly not an easy choice to pick between. The top line is almost entirely offensive, focusing on damage boosts and cooldown reductions, while the bottom line is almost entirely defense, focusing on damage resistance, defenses, and health boosts. Let's break down both lines and identify the key differences. Looking at the top line, we've got plenty of damage and armor penetration boosts, with the first unique tier being Anti-Cavalry, boosting damage dealt to cavalry by 10% total. The next standout tier is Hone, boosting Modao March by 15%. A shared tier is Reflexes, which reduces range damage taken by 10%. While both lines have their tier of reflexes, the top line only has 2 levels, while the bottom line has 3. A second Hone increases carnage damage by 9% total. Doubling down on damage, we hit another anti-cavalry tier, boosting damage dealt to cavalry by another 10% for 20% total. The final tier of the top line is Overthrow, reducing carnage's cooldown by 10 seconds. This will take the cooldown for carnage from 45 seconds to 35 seconds. Onto that bottom line. Several generic defensive tiers, with the first standout tier being Rear Guard, reducing damage taken from the rear by 10%. Now usually I wouldn't care for this veterancy boost, but Modaos often end up in the middle of a fight, and this trait can prevent a lot of damage being done to them, especially from a surprise cavalry charge. Up next we have Soldier's Life, boosting health by 6% total. Reflexes, which I mentioned earlier, reduces range damage taken by 15% total. Some blunt defense, and then Toughen Up, which reduces damage taken from cavalry by 9%. This is an important tier for countering cavalry, without losing any Modao yourself, which we'll show later. Another Soldier's Life for even more health, and another Toughen Up. But this one is rather unique. Instead of boosting damage, it reduces damage taken while using carnage by 15% total. A final tier for the bottom line is Traps, increasing all defenses by 10%. This is a great final boost, which gets the Modao defenses pumped up past rookie numbers. Now looking at both lines, is there one that is flat out better? No there isn't, and here's why. The top line gives very significant damage bonuses to the Modao Battalion, and can let them carve through groups of enemy units. The bottom line makes the Modao very durable and able to survive in harsh conditions. So why did I go bottom line? The bottom veterancy line lets the Modao function in a more flexible role and perform better as a standalone unit. Since the Modao Battalion lacks shields, they absolutely will be taking hits from the enemy one way or another. While additional damage does sound nice, you want your Modao Battalion to live to fight another battle. The top line, however, is still viable, but it relies on using the Modao in conjunction with your team. If your team has plenty of shields, top line Modao can dish out an insane amount of damage as long as they don't get hit back. The cooldown reduction on carnage is also quite nice, but still being on a 35-second cooldown means you likely won't be using it twice in one battle. What veterancy line you pick should be based on your preferred playstyle. If planning on pushing with your team, top line can be used to great effect. If you want a Modao unit that can stand on its own, bottom line holds the line. I personally prefer the bottom line because from my experience, the Modao are already at the top of the food chain. They have enough damage to kill any cavalry unit in the game and can fight any infantry unit head on. I'll show examples of what I mean later in the video. One final note is that while these veterancy lines are thick, there are still 3 points of overflow from either line, so you will still get a little offense or a little defense once you get them to level 30. Unlike the shield maidens, the Modao veterancy lines do not support a split distribution, and you should fully commit to one line to get the most out of them. Sheesh, that was a lot of talk about veterancy lines. Now how about those doctrines? The two unique Modao doctrines are highly specialized towards countering cavalry, and are another reason I went with the bottom veterancy line. The Modao Doctrine 1, which you can only acquire during the Season 8 quest line, increases damage versus cavalry by 200 points. This is an extremely large damage boost against cavalry, and gives the Modao the stopping power they need to kill any cavalry in the game. And speaking of stopping power, the Modao Doctrine 2, which you acquire from the seasonal unit challenges, lets the Modao stop enemy cavalry for an additional second, for a 2-second stop total. A 2-second immobilization of enemy cavalry will just about guarantee their death, further adding to the Modao anti-cavalry abilities. For our third doctrine, I have the Epic Mobility Doctrine equipped. I find this particular doctrine very useful on the Modao, as you'll be moving the unit around a lot. With the default Modao movement speed of 4.4, the speed boost can get them up to 5.0, letting them reposition significantly quicker. As for the other doctrine slots, you have some options. I highly recommend some kind of defense doctrine, but you could also throw on a breakthrough doctrine if you felt like it. I have a life doctrine on as I find more health to be pretty useful no matter the situation, but you can adjust as you see fit. I like my Modao to be beefy in their defenses, but you may choose to stack damage depending on which veterancy line you picked. Now some people say that the unique Modao doctrines aren't necessary, but it comes down to what you plan on using the unit for. With the unique doctrines equipped, the Modao are the ultimate anti-cavalry unit. If you skip the unique doctrines, you could boost the Modao to be more effective against infantry, but they won't have quite the same punch against cav. I personally use the unique doctrines as I love stopping and wiping a full squad of cav, which we'll see in the battlefield examples. But before we do that, let's step into the training yard and review the Modao ability abilities and mechanics. A quick look at the two Modao formations. We have 3 rank, which is a decently spread rectangle formation, great for movement in open environments. And then we have trapezoid, also known as chunky wedge. This formation is slightly more compact, and so is better suited for close quarters and melee combat. You will notice that neither of these formations are particularly dense. This separates the Modao from traditional pike units, and will alter how they are used in combat. To make things easier, we'll take a look at each of the Modao abilities on their own, as they have some quirks to their mechanics. The first ability is Modao Defense, which acts as a sort of brace. This brace, however, is not directional. Nope. Each Modao will attack any enemy that comes into range, no matter the direction. Modao Defense also activates the immovable trait, as well as a 20% damage resist while it is active. Now, while it takes a second for Modao Defense to fully activate, the Modao can enjoy the 20% defense boost as soon as you see the first flash. The Modao must go through an animation before they can attack normally, but the last part of the animation does damage and gives a little bonk to nearby enemies, which looks hilarious if I do say so myself. When using this ability, keep in mind the delay before the Modao can actually attack, as that will come into play later. The final quirk to this ability I only found after I took a closer look at the damage numbers. Usually against an unarmored opponent, the Modao should be hitting for their full damage value of approximately 1500. However, I noticed some rather large numbers popping up while the Modao were in their brace, around 6000, sometimes even more. And using the power of my big brain, I came to the conclusion that if the enemy runs into the Modao deal bonus damage, because good god, those numbers are not natural. Just look at them. This would explain some phenomena I observed where heroes would instantly die when trying to run through a unit of braced Modao. I theorized this quirk was put in to deal bonus damage to cavalry, but it seems to apply to any unit or living being that runs into braced Modao. Now, whether this bonus damage scales with the speed at which the unit is traveling, or caps at some specific value, I can't quite tell. What I can say is that there certainly is something happening here. These numbers are nuttier than extra crunchy big nut butter. And notice how the numbers seem to return to normal around 1500 once the enemy unit isn't moving as fast. Of course, enemy armor plays a part in this calculation, but there does seem to be a bonus applied depending on how fast the enemy unit is moving at the time of the collision. The next ability, Modao March, also known as Modao Stab. By me, I call it that. This is a simple stab ability that does a good amount of damage and pushes enemy units back. Being on only a 5-second cooldown, you should be spamming this ability as often as you can while you are in combat. Now, the quirks to this ability are simple but need to be understood. This ability has 3 different effects depending on the distance to a target. When used out of melee range, it gives a temporary speed boost to the Modao, but will only use the stab within approximately 1 second of usage. When used in melee range, it will stab the enemy. When used in very close melee range, it will shove enemies back. This ability may be applied to each individual Modao in the unit in one of those 3 ways, depending on their distance to the closest target. The third and final ability for the Modao is Carnage. Carnage functions similarly to a charge ability, with the Modao moving forward and hitting with a series of powerful attacks upon contact with the enemy. Like the other Modao abilities, however, Carnage has some quirks to it, the most important being that Carnage doesn't need any kind of momentum to be effective, meaning that it doesn't need to be used as a charge at all. If you just wanted a huge burst of damage, you can use Carnage after the Modao have made contact. Carnage also does not have any kind of yell or wind-up time before it happens, which is highly unusual as almost every charge in the game has some sort of tell. So if you thought the abilities seemed jank, just wait until we put them all together. We'll start our combo off with Carnage towards this group of shields. We'll let the entire animation finish, and then use Modao March to stab enemies and create distance. Directly after using Modao Stab, we'll use Modao Defense. This will trigger the 20% damage reduction and apply bonus damage to the units running into the Modao. We'll then alternate between Modao March to stab enemies and shifting back into the Modao Defense brace. If this seems silly to you, that's because it is, and it's actually the ideal way to fight with the Modao. Using this combo can actually get the Modao into a tighter, more effective formation. How about that? Alternating between Modao Defense and Stab is great if you want to maintain your position, but I'd recommend saving Carnage until you want to make a push and go on the offensive. Carnage has a very long cooldown and is a very powerful ability, so should be used wisely. Otherwise, if you're pushing with Modao, spamming Modao March will give them a speed boost and continually push the front line. Is this fighting style stupid? No, it's incredibly stupid. So let's take it to the front line where it can be appreciated, because it's battlefield example time. Our first example has us on Hidden City, and we'll be highlighting when to use our abilities while carving through the enemy team. We see polearms in the alley, so we'll brace to cover our team. We'll then alternate between Modao March and Modao Defense, depending on if we need to brace against the enemy or push the front line. When several of our teammates charge their units, we'll use Modao March to push the front line forward. Since the enemy team isn't pushing back, there's no need to brace, and the death ball can continue moving forward. When we see the lone shield wall, that's when we'll move our Modao formation, then use Carnage right in front of the wall to completely dismantle it.
Oh man, 951. Oh, I got enough time with you, little one.
Now that the enemy units are taken care of, all that's left is the Alley of Heroes. Modao are pretty terrible at chasing down enemy units and heroes, but they can slap anyone who doesn't try to run, like this big brain Maul hero. With the Maul put in his place, we'll head back to supply so we don't overstay our welcome. Now how about cavalry? Most experienced commanders won't throw their cavalry into a formation of Modao, but that's where you can surprise them. Hiding your Modao around corners, in clumps of friendly units, or at the bottom of stairs are great ways to trick your opponents into charging them. If you see enemy cavalry headed your way, make sure to get your Modaos braced to reduce damage taken. In this clip on Great Wall, I don't have my Modaos to elite yet, so they're not quite as durable as they could be, but still managed to wipe the enemy armor gear unit without any losses. You can see the damage being converted to bleed in the bottom left, but the Modao can shrug it off. On Valley Fortress, let's take a look at ambushing enemy cavalry. We've got our Modao squad just around the corner where the enemy heroes won't see our unit. When the cav charges down the stairs, we use Carnage to close the gap and chop down the cav when it tries to run back. We look up the stairs and it looks like more cav are headed our way. We'll get our Modao together and brace for impact. While it seems like a waterfall pouring down on us, the Modao stands strong. Remember what I said about the damage bonus from bracing? Wee-oo, wee-oo. Sir, do you know how fast you were going? This poleaxe dies in 2 hits from my Modao. That's a speeding ticket he won't forget. Let's rewind that so you can see it again. These numbers are full crunch nutty. Each of those hits are well over 6,000 damage. I'm not making this up. He didn't run straight through the unit either. He just got blapped by 2 Modao on the edge. Modao laying down the law. The cavalry downpour seems to have stopped, so we'll send our boys back to supply. We wiped several cavalry units and only lost 2 Modao. If you are ever in a panic situation and don't have time to brace, you can use Carnage to clear a unit of cav or infantry quickly. By taking the bottom Veterancy Line, you gain an additional 15% damage reduction while you are using Carnage, which makes a big difference when a wild cavalry unit appears. If your unit is too spread out, Modao defense might not be the best option, as it will lock the Modao unit in place. In this scenario, I was able to use Carnage to make sure each of my Modao was hitting a target since I wasn't prepared for the charge. We won't lose a single unit, and we can hustle over to supply. Taking everything we've learned so far, we'll be assaulting Shield of the Capital. Moving our Modao up with weaker units, we disguise our approach. Once I had a better look at the enemy unit composition, I noticed the enemy had plenty of shock troops, so I assumed they'd push out. I set my Modao up in a brace just outside the archway. I didn't want the musket player to give me any trouble, so I gave him a few smacks in the meantime. Once the enemy team was properly pushing out, that's when we'll start using our signature cycle of stab and brace. Once I felt the enemy front line breaking, we'll use Carnage to clear the area and begin our assault. Now we don't just want to charge our Modao into a brawl, so we'll methodically use Modao March, then Modao Defense to secure a few meters of ground at a time. The enemy team is now becoming more and more boxed in, and if they try to push back, they'll run right into my Modao brace. Once I pick off the enemy musket hero, I see our opening. We'll move the Modao formation up and paddle some stalwart booty.
It was late, but we can give him a good smack.
He might take the point.
We actually can take the point.
An enemy gray hair squad tries a desperate rush, but with a quick shove and defense brace, they've fallen and can't get up. A point is now secure, and we didn't lose a single Modao. How about Modao Weaknesses? One of the biggest I've encountered is that not only is their movement speed slow, but also their attack speed. This means that while Modao can go big game hunting against cavalry, their damage potential can be wasted if swarmed with many smaller units. Their lack of shields means they'll be getting hit by just about everything, so I'd advise sticking with friendly units to maximize their effectiveness. And finally, The absolute jank of this unit is incredible. There's a ton of micromanagement to do with their abilities and movement, so I wouldn't say they are an easy unit to use. I find the Modao to be a unique, but very odd unit. They are certainly effective in their anti-cavalry role, but their ideal playstyle is all about getting enemy units to run into them. There are certainly clever plays you can make with the Modao, but their overall jankiness makes them somewhat of a chore to take into battle. Of course, this is just my personal opinion, as I already have enough buttons to mash while using pike. I would recommend the Modao as a solid infantry unit, and if you are the kind of person who really hates cavalry, then they are a perfect unit for you. If you enjoyed this Modao Battalion unit guide, I'd appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and supporting the channel. This video concludes the Season 8 Unit Guide series, and will be my last major video for the season. I'll be retiring from Conqueror's Blade as a full-time content creator, as I have many more adventures that await me over the horizon. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for watching. I'm IroncladLion and IroncladLoba, and I'll see you in the next video.